We'll begin the session now. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the fourth and final session in our ongoing lecture series on science and technology in agriculture in India. This lecture series has been organized by the Foundation for Agrarian Studies in collaboration with Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung South Asia. Through these 4-week sessions, we attempted to expand the understanding of various developments in agricultural science that changed the position of India globally. Developments that specifically changed our position in terms of food security, food sovereignty, and the country's capacity for innovating new technologies for agricultural production. You can find the inaugural lecture of the series delivered by Professor R. Ramkumar, School of Development Studies at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and the first 3 sessions that we held as part of the series on our YouTube channel. For our final lecture in the PASTA series, we are glad to welcome Dr. C.N. Neerja, Principal Scientist at ICAR, affiliated Indian Institute of Rice Research, who will be speaking on food and nutrition security with a specific focus on the role of biofortification in Indian agriculture. If you have any questions for Dr. Neerja during the course of the lecture, kindly leave them in the Q&A box below and they will be addressed in the Q&A segment at the end. We're also happy to have as today's chair, Kalyani Raghunathan, who is an economist and research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute at New Delhi. She works on various aspects of health and nutrition in South Asia, including evaluations of social protection schemes and group-based agriculture nutrition interventions for mothers and children, and the analysis of the evolution of food prices and the cost of healthy diets. Last year, she spoke at a panel organized by our Pandemic Studies unit that looked at how COVID-19 and India's subsequent lockdowns had impacted the ability of vulnerable populations in India to afford nutritious diets. I would now like to call upon our chair to further introduce Dr. Neerja and begin the proceedings of today's event. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nihira, and thanks a lot to the Foundation of Agrarian Studies for inviting me to chair this. Good afternoon to everyone who has been able to join us today. As the introduction said, we are really honored to be joined by Dr. C.N. Neerja, who works as a principal scientist at ICAR's Indian Institute of Rice Research. Dr. Neerja is associated with biofortification and improvement of nitrogen use efficiency programs of rice. And during her postdoctoral fellowship at the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines, she helped develop Swarna Sub 1, a submergence-tolerant variety of rice that is now being widely used in flood-prone areas. Dr. Neerja is a prolific author and research scholar, having published in more than 100 national and international publications, including research articles, book chapters, and technical bulletin and popular articles. We're really glad to have you with us here today. I wanted to just give a brief introduction to the talk by saying that I think this is both extremely important and very timely, especially since today we just had the release of the NFHS 5 fact sheets that give us a sort of sense that India is currently grappling with 2 types of hunger. The more visible form of this hunger, where people simply do not have enough to eat or suffer from food insecurity, has of course been discussed a lot, particularly over the course of the last 1.5 years. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic, and there's been an expansion of social safety nets and several actions taken by both government and civil society organizations to target that. However, there's also the second form, which is malnutrition or hidden hunger, as it's often called, which is a deficiency of certain key micro and macronutrients in the diet. And that is also extremely important. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here by saying that malnutrition can have serious consequences, including stunting of growth, the weakening of the immune system, and increasing the susceptibility of our body to infection and disease. In particular, if India is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 3, which is ensuring healthy lives and promoting the well-being for all at all ages, we have to be able to deal with both types of hunger on an urgent basis. Fortification of staple foods is generally considered to be a proven, safe, and cost-effective strategy to tackle nutrient deficiencies. However, much of the body of evidence on this actually comes from high-income countries. There's a growing but slightly less well-established body of evidence from low and middle-income countries. Of the 3 main vehicles for enhancing micronutrient content of the foods we eat, There's large-scale food fortification, such as what we are familiar with adding iodine to salt, for example. There's point of use or home fortification, and then there's biofortification, which is what Dr. Neeraj will discuss today. And this is the process of increasing the nutritive value of a food crop through various methods that we'll go over. I will say that we would be hard-pressed to find someone more suitable for this talk. IPAR has been making huge advances in the development of new varieties of biofortified crops and has really helped to push the agenda on this front. And so I am in particular, and I'm sure many in the audience are really looking forward to hearing more about where we stand on this work. So the way this will proceed is that Dr. Neeraj will speak for about 45 minutes. After that, we'll open the floor to questions. But I would like to remind the audience that please don't wait till the end to submit your questions. You can ask them throughout the talk using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll collate them and then pose them to Dr. Neeraj at the end. Over to you, Dr. Neeraj.
Thank you, Dr. Kalyani. And I also thank Dr. Mathura. She has contacted me last year, and somehow we could materialize, the proposal could materialize now. And I also thank Dr. Bakshi and Mihira for the arrangements and the logistics and all other participants. I'll be sharing my screen. Yeah. Are you able to see my slides? Yeah. Okay, yes. Thank you. So the topic is the food and, am I audible and clear?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
Okay, the topic is the role of biofortification in food and nutrition security. And most of you might be aware by this time about ICAR and Indian Institute of Rice Research, because I've seen the earlier speakers are from ICAR, like Dr. Himanshu Patek. So I shall be briefly updating the status and also our experiences and observations while we are implementing different aspects of biofortification projects across crops, and also I will be specifically mentioning the rice, since rice is the major cereal and much work has been done in rice. So as Dr. Kalyani has already pointed out, so we have food security, but national nutritional security. So you have fruit production, you have access to the cereals, especially cereals and somewhat to pulses. But what about nutritional availability? As you can see, most of the people with low purchase power, their staple diet is cereals instead of the balanced diet, what we can expect of proteins, vitamins, and other ingredients of balanced diet. So this is where India is suffering from micronutrient malnutrition, especially known as hidden hunger, because you are satiated by your carbohydrate intake, especially wheat and rice, but your nutritional requirements are not being met. So the critical micronutrients are iron, vitamin A, calcium, iodine, and out of the 20 critical nutrients which are essentially required for human health. And how this affects the lifestyle or the growth and development, and also the economic impact of the country. So this is calculated using DALYs, which is Disability Adjusted Life Years, a framework, so which has clearly shown that we lose at least several $billion every year because of the this hidden hunger, which is being suffered in India much by children and women. As you can see, the global hunger index of recent global hunger index clearly shows that India is lagging behind, and at least 1/3 of the world's malnourished people live in India. And with the severity scales of malnourishment, which goes up to at least 28. So this is my, though it is old, this is my favorite report, because the air pollution is mostly visible, but malnutrition is not, which is a major health hazard in India. So as you can see, the latest recent comprehensive nutritional survey of conducted by of India, conducted by NIN, comprising around more than 1 lakh children, has clearly shown the stunted and underweight of the children anyway, but it has also clearly shown the anemia, which is the deficiency of iron, as well as deficiencies of zinc, as you can see, about 30%, and vitamin A about 20%, and vitamin D about 25%, and vitamin B12 up to 15 to 30%, and folate about 30%. So as you can see, if we just cannot expect healthy country with undernourished people, especially children and women. And as you can see here, there is a gender bias. If you see 28 out of 28% of the adolescents who has anemia, 40% are female adolescents who will become future mothers and caregivers to the of the family. So why is this? We all know this is because of poor purchase power. They cannot afford to purchase vegetables or fruits, and economic social inequality and sole dependence on rice and wheat. India, our government of India has a lot of schemes. I can just list out many. I have listed out a few which are critical, which targets food security, not essentially the nutritional security. So we are providing only carbohydrates and energy sources to under most of these schemes. Only recently, the malnutrition is being targeted by government under this National Nutrition Mission, and also in the mission portion recently has been announced. As you can see, this malnutrition also is an important part of Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, targeting zero hunger by United Nations. So as Dr. Kalyani has told, the ways to combat micronutrient malnutrition are food supplementation like vitamin A, iron, folic acid, and zinc. This has been given, as you can, in many primary health centers, in schools, and to lactating and pregnant mothers. And food fortification. Food fortification has been taken central role recently by the FSSAI has fixed standards for wheat flour, rice, milk, oil, salt, and at least some of the districts have been targeted for food fortification. And recently, Prime Minister of India has announced that fortification will be done for the rice, especially rice, under various government schemes like PDS, MD, and midday meal scheme, etc. So where this, and let me tell you, most of the people, even literates, get confused between the fortification and biofortification. Fortification is done externally after your harvest is available. You mix it with nutrients and maybe make it, or just add the nutrients to your food, whatever it is, rice or wheat flour, and then consume it. Whereas biofortification is agriculture research intervention. As you can see, what are the realistic, while there are pros and cons about fortification, whether it is good or bad, whether it is feasible or not. But as an agricultural scientist who were responsible to address the food security of the country till now, I vote for biofortification, which is which can address at least partly it can address the hidden hunger of the country. As you can see, the fortified, there are some issues with fortified rice, but it is good for addressing the immediate risk of the malnutrition. And as you can see, the requirement is about 328 lakh tons This is PDS, and the current production is 75,000 tons. So it takes a lot of time to produce these fortified rice or products, and their sustainability is still to be studied. So what is biofortification? So biofortification is a strategy of genetic enhancement of staple food crops with enhanced nutrients. Though in this talk, I'll be mentioning about genetics, transgenics, and all, I just want these social sciences students or research scholars or scientists, researchers to appreciate the science of genetics or genetically modified transgenics or GMOs, what they call, how they help us, how they help the researchers to prove the for the proof of the concept. So the biofortification is the most economic and sustainable way of combating malnutrition problem. How it is going to be most economical and sustainable, let us see once. So there are various approaches of biofortification. This is agronomic, which is just external application of appropriate nutrient, like how you are giving nutrients, fertilizers to the crop. You spray with additional nutrients. In it, then next technology is genetic modification technology, where the most unpopular transgenics is GMO technology, and which is introduction of genes from novel sources of novel sources, and conventional breeding, like how we have been doing for green revolution, the development of varieties. So as I have already said, there are ways of agronomic biofortification. Means suppose, for example, you have rice crop, just spray the minerals during the responsive growth stage. Don't worry about the any other things, just go and spray, whether in soil or in spray. You will have, since there is abundance of nutrients, your grains are rich anyway. But what is the cost of application? What about the weather? A farmer who is already burdened with so many other things, if you ask him to spray something, then it would be additional expenditure, as well as manpower, the weather conditions and biological limitations. There are so many ifs and buts for agronomic biofortification, but still at some places it is being done. And then I'll just mention about genetic modification technology. This is, as a technology, this is a beautiful technology. Many of you students might have gone to Subway. So you have a variety of dressings, salad dressings there, like how you ask for different dressings. Using transgenics, you can take your genes of your choice and make plants out of it. So there are n number of examples across crops, as you can see the list. And Dr. Garg has aptly put it, this is maximum research, minimum utilized because of the regulatory constraints. But again, I am re-emphasizing that you should appreciate the beauty of the science in genetic modification technology as proof of concept, especially for biofortification. So why transgenics? Because there is limited genetic variability in conventional breeding. Suppose you want vitamin E rice. You don't have vitamin E in grains of rice. So you just put vitamin E gene in the rice and make rice out of it. Just give it to people who are deficient in vitamin E. Similar thing goes for many things, like golden rice is a classic case where they have put vitamin E into rice and they have made it yellow and it is golden rice. So people, if you are eating it, you are not deficient of vitamin E. This is beautiful technology, but it has lots of regulatory constraints and other constraints which are beyond our presentation now. So I just want you to sensitize when the research has started. As you can see, the research of biofortification has started in rice in 1999. Still the products are, only one product has been released from transgenics of rice. So this is various ways and means how they have evolved one by one. How they have, first they have targeted iron, since because iron is very critical element for hemoglobin in human. So they have started with rice, then they have started with zinc in rice. They have limited feeding trials in rats. Then you can see they have combined lot of genes and increased the iron content in field and grasshouse conditions. You see the signs. just how they have brought genes from barley, HV is Hordeum vulgare, barley, rice, and also soya bean, and they have combined everything. They expressed in one plant, and they have seen much more the iron and zinc. This is the beauty of transgenic technology. And they have finally, with all these research and all, which has started in 99, finally they have ended up into a product which has been released in Philippines, golden rice with enriched vitamin A recently, as you can see. So it has approved, Philippines has approved the release of nutrient enriched golden rice for planting. So farmers can take up this. But there is a lot of gap between cup and lip, which we will discuss subsequently. So similarly in wheat also, several, as I have told, this is like a cafeteria of genes. If in wheat, you can see they have enriched provitamin content, iron content, its bioavailability, protein content, antioxidants, and starch quality using transgenics. Mind you, transgenics. This is not conventional method. Similarly in maize, as you can see, maize is a commercial crop in many developed countries. So a lot of research has been done using transgenics. And also please note that in several developed countries, there are no regulations for transgenics, like in Australia, Canada, and other countries as which are listed here. There is no taboo or regulatory, I should not say taboo. There is no regulation for, there is no regulatory restraints for the release of transgenics. So they have, since there is a commercial interest, these are commercial crops, there have been lot of products with provitamin A, with vitamin E, vitamin C, multivitamin, and amino acids, whatnot. So it is like you have lot of maize varieties, biofortified maize varieties, which have been developed through transgenics, which have been released in the several countries and which are being consumed regularly. And similar is case with the sorghum. So wherever there is a commercial interest, there will be a lot of R&D is going from the private sector. So soybean also, you can see they have provitamin A, they have amino acids, they have vitamin E, and they have reduced also several anti-nutrition factors, and they have been released. The list will be the same as for maize. So in some of the developed countries, even these transgenic products, biofortified varieties have been released. So these are some of the transgenics and their traits of biofortification. This is only for your information. Transgenics have not been biofortified, or any food-based transgenics have not been released in India. Transgenics, I mean GMOs. So let us go to user-friendly conventional breeding. So what does this is most promising, and with lot of difficulties, which I can tell from my experience. So there are a lot of crops also, as you can see, from rice to banana. You have a lot of varieties developed for biofortification for different nutrient traits. So what is the advantage of biofortification? It capitalizes that we consume lot of food staples, especially cereals like rice, wheat, other millets, and regardless of age, gender, and economic status. And one-time investment to develop seeds, so which will fortify themselves, so cost effective. And once in place, once the biofortified variety is adopted by the farmers, it is very sustainable. And the system ICR and and the other system has been evolved like that yield is not compromised. So it is economically sustainable to the farmers. And most importantly, since it is in natural form, the toxicity issues doesn't generally arise. And the proof of concept has been already shown since 1970s or 80s in QPM QPM quality protein in maize, which is famously known as QPM. And this has been done, kick-started by Harvest Plus, an initiative of CGIAR. So we have high zinc varieties in Bangladesh, wheat in Pakistan, and provitamin rich maize, cassava, sweet potato, iron beans in African countries. So what Harvest Plus has done since 2000 is, it has provided the breeding material and also it has provided the infrastructure to do the biofortification programs. And later on, DBT and ICR has taken a lot of initiatives. Right now, ICR has made the system for the release of the biofortified varieties, not only cereal varieties, all varieties across the crops. And we right now, as I have mentioned, we have one consortia research platform on for developing biofortified cereal varieties, and more than 70 biofortified crops are released across the country, across the crops. So how do these biofortified nutrient varieties are developed? For suppose for rice, if you see, you have natural variability for zinc and protein only in polished rice. So in brown rice, we get iron. But when you polish, all your iron will go in the brown. So we cannot do breeding for natural breeding for iron till now in rice. Similarly, for maize, we can do for iron, zinc, and protein. So there is some kind of limitation here when we are talking in for under conventional breeding. So maize, as you can see, it has less content of lysine and tryptophan, which are amino acids, part of our proteins. But they have discovered one mutant which will help in the development of QPM, quality protein maize. So similarly, they have also identified a natural variation of a gene from which you can get provitamin A rich maize. And pearl millet and all, anyway, they have by default iron and zinc in their grains. Not only, see, sometimes the biofortification stories sounds very complex. You should have nutrients and you should not have anti-nutrients. It is like nutrients are your heroes and protagonists. Your anti-nutrition factors are villains or antagonists. So you should not have anti-nutrition factors which will affect the bioavailability. What is bioavailability? Suppose I eat high zinc rice, let us say 100 ppm, but at least 50% of it that should go into my body. So that makes it bioavailable. So these are some of the anti-nutrients. I will not go into science of it. Phytic acid, which will inhibit the absorption of nutrients. So these are the these are the what do you say, for acceptance and adoption by the farmers. We expect many things from biofortified varieties. First of all, it should be high yielding so that farmers' yields are not compromised. It should have desirable quality parameters, because otherwise farmers will not eat. I am very sure that most of you will not prefer rice with gooey kind of texture, because we want the grains to be separated and convenient when we are eating with hand or spoon. So we should have desirable quality parameters. So it should be a high yielding so that farmer is not at loss. So the combining is very difficult. Suppose I have X as a donor which has high zinc, that I will be crossing with a popular variety which has high yield. I will be developing a huge number of breeding lines, from which I will select a line with promising zinc as well as iron. So for this, I need to have characterization for the estimation of iron, zinc, or any nutrient. I need to have high-end equipments which have been supported by Harvest Plus, which is called XRF. As you can see here, there are various systems of to do this elemental analysis, but we prefer this high throughput analysis. And at IIRR, this has been supported by Harvest Plus. Till today, we have done more than 80,000 samples. So we know how it goes and what are the constraints and how we can get the biofortified varieties with high nutrients and yield as well. So why it is difficult? Because since I have been told by Dr. Bakshi that this is a special group, means the students, researchers compiled from social sciences. I just want you to appreciate the why it is so difficult. So as you can see, every time I'm pressing this bar, we are seeing a group of genes acting. So to have your high zinc biofortified varieties with nutrients, we should have these many genes. In addition to that, you should have also yield related genes. But if it is a single gene, just one go, you will have that character or trait responsible. So breeding for biofortification, combining for so many genes is really difficult, and it is being done. So how the system goes, okay, as you are a breeder, you have developed a biofortified varieties. So then what happens first? What happens next? So you nominate to All India Coordinated Research Programs, which are coordinated by ICAR. So the varieties will go to various locations. They have been screened for 1 or 2 years, and the promising entries with desirable parameters will be identified as varieties. So we have different system for rice, wheat, maize, pearl millet, and whatnot. For all crops, vegetables, ICAR has developed a system where you can see biofortified varieties. In rice, so here I'll just explain, this is the basal level. So this is baseline level. Suppose you take any polished rice, you will find this 12 to 16 ppm and 7 to 8% of protein in as a baseline. But our target is this. So, and in addition to that, you should have high yield, high protein, high nutrient, as well as quality. So it is like almost asking for impossible. Even then, we have till now at least 10 varieties developed and released from IIRR, our institute, National Institute of Rice Research, National Rice Research Institute, Cuttack, and IGKV Raipur, and also from one private company, Nojividu Seeds Limited. So you have lot of varieties released, at least 10 varieties released for enriched with zinc or protein or both for rice. Similarly, you have the baseline levels for iron, zinc, protein here, and our target is this. And at least we have 20 varieties developed from IIWBR, Karnal, and PIU, Indore, many places in the country, from Pune as well as, and US Dharwad as well. So you have 20 varieties here which are released for various nutrient biofortified wheat varieties released in India with various nutrients. Similarly, maize, you can see even they have hybrids with the lysine as well as tryptophan, iron, zinc. They have more than 15, 20 are there. And they actually maize is also being is a poultry feed. So we have also conducted experiments, feeding experiments for the poultry, and they have definitely found that it improves the breast muscle in poultry feeding experiments. Means your poultry is healthy if it eats biofortified grains of maize. And interesting thing is, in pearl millet, for varietal release, they have made a mandate of iron 42 ppm, zinc 32 ppm. Otherwise, they will not release. As you can see, there are more than 10 varieties released. Their baseline is 50 ppm, 35 ppm, but they have made at least 1.5 times they have made the target. So is sorghum. Sorghum is already biofortified. So still they are looking for much more enhanced content of nutrient content. But one problem with sorghum is it has anti-nutrients. So is case with the small millets. So these are some of the varieties which have been released in millets. As you can see, it is only very recent. Very recently, they started releasing these varieties, and I'll just go through. And these are pulses. Pulses also have been focused recently for enrichment of nutrients. Biofortified pulses are also available, lentils, and this is groundnut. As recently they have started rich in oleic acid, in comparison to the popular varieties, rich in oleic acid and linoleic acid in comparison to traditional varieties. This is linseed. And we were talking about anti-nutrients earlier. So IRA has developed mustard varieties which are low in erucic acid. So all kinds of research is being done by scientists to have biofortified products as either heroes or villains, either enhancing the heroes or discouraging the anti-nutrient factors. So in soybean also, as you can see, some of the anti-nutrient factors have been reduced, and they have also enhanced the nutrients. So, and cauliflower also. But actually, to be honest with you, maybe vegetable people may not like it. Whether if a person with poor purchase power can afford cauliflower, he can as well as afford palak or any leafy vegetables. But however, we have provitamin A rich cauliflower also, and same thing goes for this other sweet potato and yam. Actually, these are some of the tubers which are being which are consumed in several states as staples. So same thing goes with the pomegranate. As you can see, at least it is 1.5 times richer in many nutrients in comparison to the popular varieties. So where globally, if you see, at least more than 200 varieties have been developed, officially released in 30 countries. In Bangladesh, we have several zinc rices. Philippines also has released one zinc rice, in addition to the golden rice. So you have wheat lines, and in African countries, you have maize, you have cassava, you have sweet potato, you have orange flesh maize also, and iron beans are also being, trials are all being conducted. So then comes the importance of bioavailability. So once the varieties are developed, it is important to convince policymakers so that these biofortified varieties are integrated, and we should also know that what is the efficacy, what is the efficiency of these biofortified varieties. So several studies have been conducted in African countries, but unfortunately for rice and wheat, only limited studies have been conducted and not using biofortified. They have just done fortified flour or fortified rice, which has been done chemically, and they have shown in rice and wheat that it is effective. But however, pearl millet, the studies have been done. 4 independent studies have shown the efficacy of the biofortified pearl millet. Actually, it is not a rocket science. Even anybody can understand, since the quantity is more. If you have a handful of rice which has 10 parts of zinc, or if you have a handful of rice which has 30 parts of zinc, naturally your absorption will be more, your zinc absorption in your body will be more. So this is what it is, and I am excited to say that we have found one maize hybrid, which will, if you take 100 grams, it will meet 70% of your recommended dietary allowance. So this is very exciting for us. For this, we are conducting clinical trials. Because of the COVID, the clinical trials are not going in the pace as they should be. Otherwise, this we can recommend to any midday meal scheme. You can see the magnitude of this study. If you just give any gruel or some broth or some soup with this maize, it will address 70% of your RDA of vitamin A. So, and let me also tell you, I have been working since maybe 10-15 years in biofortification now. The question often asked is, are they toxic? Why, even not by the general public, even when we have proposed a study of feeding trials, clinical trials of this experiment, the first question the expert asked was whether this is toxic, whether we have done toxicity studies. So I am to just to tell you, if on an average consumption of 250 grams of polished rice with 12 ppm will in rice will cater only 20% of our requirement. So even if you are taking 24 ppm or 28 ppm, it will hardly cater 50% of your requirement. So for the zinc to become toxic, at least it needs a 70 parts of zinc, which is not feasible right now. So we, as I have mentioned, we have one consortia research project where we have addressed this these traits, these important traits across the universities and across NIN. We also take the studies of the straw. What happens when animals eat the straw of these biofortified crops with help of National Institute of Animal Physiology and Nutrition. So this is a comprehensive research proposal. So now comes the scaling up of the biofortified varieties. Now I have till now I have mentioned all the rosy part of the research, and let me tell you the thorns of the research now, because once this ideally to scale up these varieties, we should have they should replace the existing cropping existing varieties of India. Existing cereal varieties or crop varieties, which are nearly similar in yield, quality, and duration and agronomic practices. And let me tell you, I have gone myself with our biofortified varieties released from our institute as well as NRRI to the farmers. First question they asked is, we don't bother whether it is rich in iron or protein, but we need only medium slender grain. That is Sona type, Sona type, which is very famous in southern parts of India. So unless it is Sona type, we don't want to eat this rice. So that this is where the acceptability comes, and it is very difficult to convince the farmers unless you have what they want is exact same variety with enhanced nutrient content. Anyway, we are developing now. We have a lot of varieties. That was our experience with the our first wave of varieties, which we were mostly focusing on biofortification. So we were developing varieties with high nutrients, but we have found that even their size, their cooking quality matters a lot to the farmers. So we have around 70 biofortified varieties which are slowly gaining the farmers' acceptance. So we should have a large value chain system where you have seed production, supply, continuous supply, then popularization without changing anything. Like you should not change the cropping pattern, or management practices should not be changed. So that would help the biofortification application of the biofortification research. Actually, creation of demand and premium price for biofortified grains will give a lot of impetus for this research. But if you want to create the demand or premium price for biofortified grains, when we have approached the PDS of officials, the first question they have asked us is whether your biofortified rice has a typical color. Like they want something like blue kerosene. So if I want to develop a biofortified rice, it should be like purple or green or a very different color where they can differentiate in the market, where they will be procuring under PDS, so that they can give a different price. So, but the catch-22 situation is, if it is colored, if it is different, the farmer will not take the variety. So it is really very difficult when, because as a breeders or researchers, we are excited because we have the product in hand. But when it comes to the adoption, there are n number of questions. So, and why biofortification of cereals? And you must have already known from this, during COVID time, especially low income group and middle income group have suffered a lot, especially in terms of nutrition, and already vulnerable group like children and women suffered most. And there is disruption of midday meal schemes because of lockdown. So they were reported to be indicated at risk of malnutrition. And wherever hotspots are there, they have also found that it is most vulnerable because of their anemia and underweight. So in this times of crisis, it is staple cereals which have helped the major food source, either because of their what do you say, stable prices, or because of the distribution through GOI, non-perishable goods. So that's why any incremental improvement, if you are making in staple cereals, would have lot of impact in addressing malnutrition, which is being suffered by our country. So what are the challenges? The major challenge is most of the people say already we are excessively dependent on human diets. And again, you are biofortifying and make us more dependent on wheat and rice. But if you are seeing at the big picture, it is actually, what do we want? Whether we want nation with children and women deficient in various nutrients, or you want a sole dependence on rice or wheat. So this is where our judgment comes into picture. And from developers' point of view, as I have been telling many times during my talk, combining high yield and high nutrients is very difficult because of the dilution effect, and there is a lot of influence of soil and management, and there are anti-nutrients, and these are very complex traits, and farmers are not interested. Recently, I have visited some farmers which are growing traditional land races. So what they are asking is, okay, we are growing, but we are getting the, the good yield, or but our miller doesn't want to procure these grains because of rice, because they are of different shape. They want only medium slender grain, which is Sona type. So there is no special price or no incentive. So what farmers will do is they will grow as long as we are giving seed, we are giving inputs, we are visiting them. The moment we don't do, we are stopping, or we're not going to their fields where we are not supporting, they will revert back to their varieties. So recently Vasan has made an interesting program, a small initiative, which is called Manapanta Mana Arogyam, means our crop, our health. So what they have done is they have asked them to grow these biofortified varieties, at least half acre of their own plot and for their own consumption. At least health of farmers will be improved. So this is where these are the small steps we have to take. And who are our target consumers? Sometimes even researchers are confused because they will be marketing this to as other products like poha, or what do you say, this ready-made granules like oats, rolled oats. But so whether we should promote this as health food, but if it is being promoted as health food, it is as good as the person who has the power to purchase as a health food, he can as well as purchase palak or carrot or pomegranates. So people with low purchase power, who are solely dependent on rice or wheat, who are dependent on PDS and MDM and other public schemes, should be more benefited by biofortification. So we have explored various ways and means of public distribution system also. So as I have said before, because there is no mass procurement, it is not possible, as there is no feasibility for special procurement, but block-wise, district-wise procurement can be done. As you might be well aware that Government India has done mapping of vulnerable districts. So at least in these vulnerable districts, these biofortified varieties should be grown and should be adopted in midday meal schemes and ICDS. And let me also tell you, in this at this juncture with one KVK, that is Krishi Vignan Kendra, we shared our seed. So youngsters who have just joined the KVKs, the two girls, they have shown interest in these biofortified varieties. Initially, they have fed to only one boy, but when that boy was having good growth and the mothers and other in that village have also shown interest, so they have asked me for more seed. Then I have provided some 500 kg of seed. Then they have started feeding the not 50 kg of seed. Then they have started feeding to I think 5 to 10 children in that school, in that cluster. Later on, when the district collector has seen that they were very enthusiastic and approached us for seed, we have recently provided around 500 kg of 2 biofortified varieties. This is all informal because of the lady collector has shown some interest and the staff of KVK have shown some interest. So like this, a formal approach should be there for adopting these biofortified varieties, so people are convinced. And I have also seen some lady farmers who have shown interest, because she herself told, because our scientists are telling this is rich in zinc, so if we consume, our family health will be improved. So this kind of attitude should come from farmers as well. So what are the ways to promote to integrate biofortification to address nutrition security? So materials, we have varieties readily available, as you have seen, across the crops, across the country. We have plethora of varieties available. We have methodology available for the development of varieties, and popularization is slow, unfortunately. Awareness is also not going as we anticipated. Adoption is also slow. Integration is yet to start. Procurement yet to start. Public distribution yet to start. But with the will from scientists and even private sector and policy makers, definitely the research can be translated to benefit the society. So thank you very much. This is my email ID. You can contact me anytime. And recently, even biofortification has gone to the bureaucratic level, and people are noticing that there is research programs are going on biofortification. As you can see, the Prime Minister has dedicated, Honorable Prime Minister has dedicated 17 biofortified crops on World Food Day recently. Thank you very much. And any doubts? I am here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neemja. I think I'm probably speaking on behalf of several people when I say the line where you said, we are really asking you to do the impossible, really struck home, because it's everything, right? It's taste, appearance, it's agronomic practices, it should be high yielding, it should also be high nutrients. So definitely a lot going on, and really impressed with the wealth of research and the number of varieties that have been produced. We've had several questions coming in, so I'm going to start with the questions. Some of them are also building on questions that I had, so that's really great. So I'll ask one, I'll club a few questions together on the same theme and try to ask in some buckets. So the first set of questions was around transgenics, and if I understand correctly, then transgenics means genetic modification of crops. So one of the questions that we had from Deepak Johnson is, have Indian institutions undertaken research on these GM or CRISPR-based biofortified varieties? And I would just add to that, what are the main concerns around transgenics, and why has that not moved ahead in the Indian context as it has elsewhere? And then I'd also add on Mathura's question to that, which was, she's asking if the GM maize was approved in Mexico and Colombia. And if so, was there a debate about introducing genetically modified crops in the areas of crop origin?
Okay. So you just, so whatever you have answered, you have questions you have clubbed. Yeah, genome editing, first thing I'll just, I think, okay. First thing I'll tell is, as genome editing is being explored in several Indian labs as well as abroad, and still their acceptability as transgenics is yet to be whatever regulatory constraints we have for transgenics, they still, even for CRISPR-Cas or genome edited lines also, the concerns are same. There is no clear-cut policy still for genome edited crops released for the release of genome edited crops in India. Though the technology is reported to be or proven to be different from GMOs, still the adoption or regulatory constraints are not yet clarified by GAC or Government of India. And the second question is by Dr. Mathura is
was around whether there was a debate about introducing GM maize in when that was approved in Mexico and Colombia.
No, I'm not aware of GM maize in Mexico and or the place of origin she was asking. Yeah, no, I'm not aware of the.
I was surprised. I was glad to hear it actually, because I thought the South American countries, Central America, were opposing GM on grounds of maize is originated.
Yeah. No, but it is released. I'm not aware. But okay. I'll let you know. I'll just see whether there has been debate and what are the actual GM released in maize, in Mexico especially.
Okay. The second set of questions is around the debate that we're currently having on mandatory fortification. And you had touched upon that at the beginning of your presentation. So one question from Professor Ramakumar is that you mentioned the key difference between fortification and biofortification. Currently, there is a controversy on mandatory fortification of food grains. So when this is implemented through policy, what are the differences if we are adopting fortification versus biofortification? And where do you stand on this controversy? And I would just add to that another question from Deepak Johnson, which sort of builds upon the same thing. So one of the arguments that is made against the use of mandatory fortification is that there can be regional variations in deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies. So I would just add to this Deepak's question about what are your thoughts on these regional variations and the argument against the universal or mandatory use of fortification.
Fortification, see, again, from my experience, fortification is long-term, not sustainable. It is good to address immediately, like vulnerable districts or immediate needs. But you just imagine it has to be consumed within 1 year, and so much requirement is there. We have very limited resources. How many mills are there? How much can be done? So in place of that, if you are focusing on biofortification, making a limit for threshold level, like how Paul Millet has done for the release of varieties, you make mandatory of 14 ppm or whatever ppm is available, whatever parts is available, slightly exceeding level, you can have this, at least for micronutrient malnutrition, it will address. And coming to the fortification, again, I go back to the same point, whatever I have been presented, that it is long-term, it is not sustainable. You just imagine the big picture, where you will synthesize, where you will store, how it will be distributed, and how much is bioavailability, what are the toxic effects, what are the side effects. There are so many things in fortification because it has not come through the system, because biological system is buffered system. It has not come through the, yet we are taking tablets. They are not harmful unless you are swallowing many, right? So fortification is also well researched, but long term it is not sustainable to the population of our magnitude. Anything I missed?
I might push back to ask where you stand on the mandatory fortification debate that is going on right now.
Mandatory fortification, see, again, we don't have much choice because we cannot afford to be malnourished also forever. If 2-3 years, see, first health is prime important of especially children and women. So fortification, biofortification, even just oral supplementation is also fine. Yes, I am with fortification as well. But sustainability is difficult in long run.
Okay. I have a more technical question, and this one comes from Vivek Babu Girija, which is asking, he's eager to learn what the donor organism is for each of the nutrients. So iron, zinc, protein, vitamins A or E in each of the crops. Are the donors the same for all the crops? So that's a very technical question that I also don't understand. And then I'll add also another question from Madhura, which is asking, is your suggestion that biofortification should focus more on cereals than on lentils or even on vegetables, which are already nutrient rich or have more suitable nutrients?
I'll first answer Dr. Madhura's question. Yes, cereals should be addressed first because they are consumed in more quantity and they are publicly available. They are not perishable and they are accessible anywhere through MDM or PDS, whatever you say, because of their abundance and non-perishability and low cost of production or procurement by the government. Cereals should be focused first, especially rice and wheat. They should be focused and they should be fortified, biofortified, fortified as well as biofortified. And going back to the donors question, I'm so glad somebody has asked that question because since 2010, we have been researching in rice. We could not find a favorite donor where we have a lot of zinc, but we stumbled upon one landrace from Tamil Nadu, Karupanel, which shows in polished rice 40 ppm. So it was mind-boggling to us, but unfortunately it is very poor plant type. It shatters, it is very poor yielder, it gives only a handful of grains. So for each trait, donors are separate. Only in transgenics, when you are talking about GMOs, you can take whatever gene you want and put it in one background. Otherwise, if you are talking in conventional breeding way of biofortified varieties, each trait is a donor, has a separate donor. Maybe if you are lucky, you can get 1 or 2 traits mixed, but difficult. See, plant has its own balancing system. So if it is having zinc already in it cannot have protein also, then it will become much more weaker. So it has to spend a lot of energy to enmass. Why plant will have so much nutrients in its grain? It need not have, it needs only for its sustenance. So we should have different donors for different traits.
There are a couple of questions on the timeline as expiry date for the use of fortified rice. I'm not sure if that means whether there's a difference in the shelf life of biofortified products, but maybe you can.
Yes, there is a difference also in shelf life of nutrients based on the nutrients. Suppose if you're talking about zinc or iron, there is no perishability. But if it is vitamin A, it degrades over a time. And same thing with the protein. It degrades, maybe some degrade fast, some degrade slow, but degradation is there based on protein, based on the nature of the trait. Like vitamin A degrades faster, protein degrades, but iron and zinc, they will not degrade. We have conducted that experiments. 5-year-old, 6-year-old also, their quantity remains, nutrients, elements, their quantity remains same.
Okay. And then I had a related question, which was about what are the sort of barriers for adoption of these biofortified crops by farmers? So one of the things that you talked about was was that they have to be high yielding, and that's being taken into account in the development. The other is sometimes around appearance of the actual, say, the rice grain. But I was wondering if there's also a difference in the agronomic practices that farmers have to use when there's no difference there. So no difference in, say, fertilizer application, water application. Okay.
No,
Right.
because we see that it is not deviating much. But at the same time, I'll take small example. We have one BPT variety, which is a popular variety in rice, which known for its medium slender grain. So they want exactly like that, but with enhanced zinc. So we are trying to do that. We have done that. But when we are crossing two things, invariably, it is, though we keep on selecting, say, ideally, there should be 50-50 if you are crossing something. But we see that we are selecting the favorable parent. But by the time you do, there will be some or the other small things creeping up, which will not be liked by farmers. They will say, when we are cooking, it is becoming sticky, or overnight it is not staying, it doesn't taste the same. Something, it's a really tricky business, but still we are doing, we have 10 varieties, at least 3 or 4 of us are popular, but difficult to convince farmers to take these varieties on their own, Even maybe after some time, after consuming by themselves, if you are finding that their health has improved, or their general feeling has improved, definitely then we cannot stop them. Till that time, it will take some time. Actually, Government of India has made some initiative also in 2019 to cultivate this in as a field level demonstrations. Then later on, when rice has become excess, because everybody is growing only rice, it stopped this. Along with that, it stopped biofortified varieties also. Still, we are doing it at our level to popularize these varieties. But see, it is not visible, If it is visible, then they will understand. And let me also tell you, it is so difficult to convince even educated people, because zinc is not something, or iron, okay, iron, calcium people know, but zinc and all, who cares? Zinc is so difficult. COVID time, at least people came to know about little bit zinc, otherwise difficult. And vitamin A, okay, if you say tryptophan, amino acids, what farmer will understand? So difficult. We will simply say these are good for health. You just keep consuming. After some time, you will find your health improved.
So since you raised zinc, I know that there's been some research on using zinc fertilizers, which I presume is that form of biofortification that you referred to at the beginning, which is use of agronomic practices. Can you comment on the differences either in the effectiveness or in the cost effectiveness of the use of agronomic practices versus
I'm again glad you asked this question. Actually, what happens is, in all your improved varieties, we have checked, when we check this straw, actually they take more zinc or more nutrients, because they are luxurious, their growth is good, but not all the varieties are good in transporting whatever zinc they have in the plant to grain. So this is where it is tricky. So we need something which will take up. So agronomy, how much you pump, it will not go to grain. Means if you are giving through soil, even if you are spraying also, dipping also, for a while it will take, because it is buffered system. So after a while, after some concentration, it will not take up anymore.
Got it. Then I had a question, just since we're talking about scaling up these biofortified programs and hopefully using them to supply the large social safety nets like the PDS or the midday meal schemes, ICDS. So where are we right now on the movement towards achieving that kind of scale of production? And what do you think, what is your outlook? At what sort of point in the future do you anticipate that we might reach that point?
Actually, we should convince the policy makers at a district level and first mandal level and district level to adopt this rice. Like I was mentioning about one lady IAS officer who has shown interest. Like that, we should go with the with our biofortified cereals and its impact, and show them that this should be integrated in midday meal scheme and ICDS, so that at least once the proof of concept has been shown in real field. Field means, I mean, in schools or in any Anganwadis, definitely the technology will be, the biofortified varieties will be adopted.
So since you said the proof of concept, I know that one of the recommendations that the Harvest Plus set of studies has is that there should be an accompanying strong monitoring, evaluation, and learning system so that these programs, as they are rolled out, are also evaluated and we have evidence. And I saw this particularly in the context of their iron fortified pearl millet study that they conducted in India a few years ago. So I know that you said that we have so many varieties of cereals, of pulses, of even of pomegranate, which I had never imagined was being biofortified. And yet there are only 4 research studies that you mentioned that are being conducted in the Indian context. Could you comment a little bit about the sort of research agenda of ICAR and whether you have built these research partnerships with other organizations to kind of track the effect of these programs or these varieties?
In the CRP biofortification, National Institute of Nutrition is also part of the consortium. So we were to conduct these clinical trials initially, because as I was mentioning that excited results of provitamin A hybrids, maize. So we have produced the seed. We could not take up the trials because of the COVID in the first year. So since it is provitamin A, it has degraded. And right now, we are taking up trials with zinc rice in the coming season. This again, we could not take up because it is very expensive. Why expensive? I will tell you. For iron, there is a biomarker like hemoglobin. For zinc, they have to do a lot of research, as you are aware of. But still, it is not that we cannot do that. So first, we are doing it. We are doing it. It's just initially we did not have varieties. Now we have varieties. Now we have to do mass multiplication, procuring the seed and giving it to the control group and doing. Definitely, we will do it. Definitely, in coming 1 or 2 years, it will be done.
Okay, we look forward to seeing the results of those studies. A couple of one question that was building on something that you had said earlier, which was someone is asking if you could expand upon your comment about the sustainability of fortification in the long term and why you say that that's not a sustainable method for us to use in the long term. So that was just a follow-up. And then Sandeepan is asking to build upon your comment on the difficulties in mixing different traits. Would the precision be better in GM-based biofortification than conventional selective breeding?
Obviously, GM-based will be very simpler. Actually, if you see, GM has started in 99. So in 99, by this, in all crops, you have all kinds of combinations of genes. But thing is their acceptability and regulatory constraints. And again, going back to the fortification point, just imagine the magnitude of fortification needed for the cereals which are required for the PDS. I think in my slide I have shown, I think 328 lakh tons are needed for lakh tons are needed for PDS, whereas we have the capability of mixing these machines only for 1,000 tons. So some 60,000 tons. So from 60,000 tons to 328 lakh tons, and the means you can visualize, no, the quantum of work. You should have like rice mills, you should have fortification mills across the country, and you should have lot of logistics to transport them, to put them in FCA godowns, and to take them to ICDS, to schools and storage. And there should, like how Harvest Plus has done this project across the world, we should have one fortification plus kind of body in India, which will coordinate with all these FCI and storage, manufacture, transport, and delivery to the schools, and see that it is not how much is it is consumed within 1 year. It can be done, but it is a huge task. Just for us, let me tell you, we have given biofortified seed to the farmers for multiplication, for conducting trials, clinical trials, feeding trials with NIN. During COVID time, we could not buy back because our offices are closed. Okay, that was COVID time. Still buying back from the farmers, that itself we could not do. So you can imagine the logistics involved in this kind of huge fortification. No, visualizing itself is very difficult. Unless one thing can be done is maybe your mills you can fortify. See, biofortification itself is so complex, so I'm not entering into fortification.
Understood. Okay. I think we have reached, I hope that I've addressed almost all of the questions that we've received. If any one of the other panelists has something to bring up, then we can ask that. Otherwise, I will hand it back to the organizers to close the session. And thank you so much, Dr. Neeraja. That was really informative and lots of fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Kalyani, and thanks a lot, Dr. Neeraja. That was really very insightful, and from the discussion and the question answer session, it is quite clear that we had many questions, and this session has helped us gain clarity on a number of points, questions on which we had very limited understanding, or our understanding was limited to what we have read here and there in popular media. So many thanks to you. This, as everybody would know, that this is the last of the lecture series that we started about a month ago with the inaugural lecture by Professor R. Ramakumar. Which was followed by 4 lectures, one on seed science by Dr. Rajendra Prasad from the University of Agriculture Sciences, which was followed by the lecture by Dr. K.C. Bansal, who spoke on the science of genetics and gene technologies and CRISPR-Cas9. The lecture before Dr. Neeraja's talk today was by Dr. Himanshu Pathak, a soil scientist who spoke on what are the new initiatives to deal with abiotic stress. And today we had Dr. Neeraja. So, and I think that with these 4 lectures, although it is not exhaustive, as we have been saying that we wish to expand the scope of this lecture series, maybe next year or the year after, trying to see if we can do, continue doing this, even, meeting each other physically, providing a physical space, going beyond the online lecture series, a workshop or a conference where we can discuss more about the importance of science and technology in agriculture in India, and provide a platform for the interaction between social scientists who are studying different aspects of agrarian relations, agricultural economics, rural development, and agricultural scientists who are working on various aspects, various dimensions of agriculture science in India. This was the purpose of this lecture series, to familiarize the students and scholars from the social science community to the different component parts of agriculture science. How do they function? What are the basics? little bit of their nitty-gritties, and the various milestones in the development of agriculture science in India and the world in general, and how has it impacted the agricultural production and agricultural economy of the country in past, and the role that it will continue to play in order to deal with some future challenges. So I hope we have been able to do some justice to that objective that we had set for ourselves, and that we owe a very, very big thank to all the speakers and the chairs of the last 4 lectures who have, every lecture, let me say this, that all of these, the 5 lectures, including the inaugural lecture, had at least, 2 or 3, maybe more key messages that could be seen as takeaways. If I have to recount, Dr. Rajendra Prasad clarified many points, such as what is the difference between in situ and ex situ seed conservation, and sort of made it clear that it is wrong to assume that traditional seed varieties are being lost when we are coming up with new seed varieties. They are being conserved, often in ex situ conditions, which is a better way of conserving, in fact. We also, with Dr. Bansal, we came to know that the science of genetics is not unnatural. In fact, science, he clarified, learns from nature and tries to expedite the natural processes as research progresses. Dr. Pathak made it clear that bad science cannot lead to good policies. He also clarified that a policy that is not backed by science is in effect a bad policy. And today, Dr. Neerja, you made us, a number of things, a number of takeaways here. But one takeaway that certainly sort of will be there with most of us, I think, is that that scientific research has to bring together many aspects, as is shown in the research of biofortification, whether it is yield, the question of better nutrition, as well as profitability, as you were sort of kept on saying that farmers would want, eventually the farmer wants better profitability, that there is a market for the produce that he is producing, biofortified or not. And science has to, while discussing the challenges of scaling up a technology, it is not just the science, but also the combination of yield, profitability, and the specific traits that you are looking for. You also made it clear that how science can be used for differentiated development goals. So if there are people who can afford, who have the purchasing power to have all the different, if the intake of different nutrients can be taken up as food material themselves, then maybe they do not, the need for biofortification is not so urgent for them. But for those who are mostly dependent on cereals, and cereals are the staple and maybe only food source, biofortification can really be a helpful, go a long way in providing nutritional security for that segment of population. So, and I think you also made it very clear that when science is translated into policy, it is not just the results of the technology, but also the social and economic context that plays a very, very important role. So thank you once again, Dr. Neerja, for this very insightful lecture today, and Dr. Kalyani for chairing the session, making sure that all the questions are clubbed in, classified properly and are asked. So with these words, let me thank you all. Thank everybody who has been part of organizing this session, and the participants who have been, despite the fact that there is a fatigue of online programs and there is a number of online programs happening every day, nonetheless, there was an audience that amongst social scientists, students, and scholars who took the effort to be in our audience. So thanks a lot. Thank you all. And to the online events management team of the Foundation for Agrarian Studies led by Mihira, many, many thanks for conducting this lecture series. All our lectures would be available as an archive in our YouTube channel, and we would soon be posting about them on our social media platforms as well. And we just hope that on this, we would be able to continue this endeavor of taking agriculture science, basics of agriculture science to the social science community. With this hope, let me close today's program and the lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.